Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. We are going to get started here. This webinar is the luck of the compliant. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everyone. I have a fun little leprechaun. If I put him just properly in the camera, he might show up here. We're going to be talking about AI governance strategies that pay off because we probably shouldn't really rely on our cool little leprechaun over here. And the chatty person is myself. I'm Jodi Daniels. I'm the CEO at Red Clover Advisors. We are all about privacy consulting, the operational aspects of privacy and AI governance, helping companies with all of the long tactical to-dos. And I am so excited to be joined with Brandon Reilly. So Brandon, please tell us about yourself.
Jody, thank you. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody. I think I was invited because I have an Irish last name, and only for that reason. So thank you for having me. I am a partner at the national law firm Manatt, Phelps and Phillips, where I lead our privacy and data security practice. I'm located in Northern California, so my practice is multidisciplinary. It's organized around really anything relating to data regulatory compliance, data strategy. But we also handle incident responses. We handle privacy litigation if it comes up, government regulatory investigations, data governance, and AI governance and testing and consulting, which we can talk about in a little bit. So we're really proud of our kind of multidisciplinary practice and really blending in everything as it relates to data compliance and the risk environment.
Wonderful. Well, Brandon, we are delighted that you can join us on St. Patrick's Day and also to share all of your amazing knowledge that we're going to get into today, which is what are AI challenges that companies are facing today, as well as AI's dynamic risk environment, what's happening on the state privacy front, tips for building an AI governance program, walk through a case study to really help exemplify that, and we technically have Q&A at the end here, but I actually want to really emphasize, please put your questions. You should hopefully have a little Q&A button contraption here on the bottom of our Zoom webinar, and we will look throughout to be able to try and address those during, so you don't have to only hold them to the end. I also have 3 polling questions just to make sure that you're having some fun. So I'm going to get started on the first one, which is, has your company established an AI governance program? You can pick not started, underway, but you got a long way to go. You're doing amazing. You're almost there. And finally, yes, you have a structured AI governance program. So please join the party. Let's see what people say. My little leprechaun for anyone who is here. We got to have some fun wearing our green and our leprechaun. All right, I will end the poll and share the results. Hopefully I'm sharing the results. Okay, so it looks like we're kind of split, almost like a pretty even third throughout of underway, but a long ways to go. That's the slight leader here. Underway and almost there, just under 30%, and then an even 30% with a structured AI governance program. And for the 6% of you who do not have one yet, hopefully at the end of this webinar, we will give you some information to help you get started. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Brandon to kick us off with some of the challenges that we're facing. And Brandon, just let me know to move to the next slide.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Jody. You can go to the next slide. So, I think it's important to orient, the audience around, what is leading to the need for AI governance. I think that this has, become an incredible central talking point over the past year or two. But the environment for the business use cases for AI is evolving kind of every month. Where we are now, and this is in large part what we see working with our clients, talking to board level, executive level folks, is that we've definitely reached the point where AI is no longer experimental. We're not really in the design phase. That there's at least a mandate in most organizations that AI needs to be deployed in a way that actually is shaping core business decisions. So that's really where we are now. The kind of maturity cycle has progressed, whether we're comfortable with it or not. At the same time, the risk environment is dynamic and it's accelerating. And when we kind of survey the environment at this moment, there's kind of two twin dynamic environments. There's the risk environment, which is defined by applicable regulations, by litigation risk, by reputational risk. And then there's also the tech and business environment, which is also rapidly changing. The capabilities of the technology that we're talking about is improving and iterating at an incredibly rapid pace. And also, I think just organizational understanding about how to use those technologies is evolving at a fairly rapid pace as well. And so, right now, the questions that we get, it was not so long ago that the questions were, can we use AI? Can we use AI for this purpose? What are the risks? Shouldn't we just be prohibiting it? Those questions are not coming up anymore. It's really how can we use AI confidently in a million different use cases. So that's really the moment. If you want to go to the next slide, this is kind of some of the challenges that we're seeing that a good and responsible AI governance program can answer. Um, so there is a demand now for monitoring, intervention, and transparency. This is seen most clearly in applicable regulations that apply to AI deployments, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But these needs are also, demanded from the risk environment as we understand it more generally. The problem is that AI decision making is often described as a black box. I think there's probably some room for debate about whether that's a proper characterization for the cognitive abilities of different AI models, but generally speaking, it's very difficult to get a actionable kind of view into the decision making process. There's also this challenge of generative AI deployments really having what I call infinite outcomes at scale. So, if you have any doubt about whether that's true, think about how many different variant outputs can be created using the same prompt and the exact same model and the exact same deployment. It tends to change every time because of the way that generative AI and LLM models work. And then even if you adjust the prompt or the input ever so slightly, even in non-material ways, you're going to get yet more variance. And these are infinite. And so if you're trying to understand what is capable of these, what these tools are capable of in production, you can't have a definite answer because you don't have certainty that input X always results in output Y. And so that's a major challenge. Another issue here is that visibility into the inferences that are actually made is also limited. And this is where we get to I think one of the most practical challenges right now is that when we talk about governance, the discussion is often triggered by the procurement process. We're trying to license a model. We're trying to license a really cool AI tool, deploy it into our corporate environment. And the answers that are given are system level assurances by these vendors. So, look, we're certified in X, Y, and Z. We've done these different audits and tests. The system level assurances are things that vendors are used to providing to their enterprise customers, right? What they are largely incapable of providing is what we would call per inference proofs. This is very difficult to provide on the market, and what we see is that type of a capability is very slow to come around and very hard to get, especially in the context of procuring an AI tool. And I'm happy to talk about that more. What do I mean by per inference proofs? But generally speaking, that's kind of the problem that we're seeing. So taking into consideration all these challenges, this is where AI governance comes in. Jodi, I'll give you a chance to chime in there while I look at
Yeah. Well, we also have two
questions.
questions. So actually, I'd
Yeah.
love to pose these questions to you. So one question is, how can we ensure the accuracy of AI outputs? What are your thoughts?
Okay, that's a great question. And there are a lot of answers to that. One answer that I really like and that we'll talk about a little bit later is the potential for AI testing. So you can do outcome-based testing if you are able to determine what is the standard that you're testing against for accuracy. So, when you say accuracy, that can mean a lot of different things. But if you allow yourself to kind of define what accuracy means for your specific deployment, you can quantitatively test the outputs of an AI tool against that standard for accuracy. you can identify the instances in which an output is resulting in an inaccurate result, and then you can perform a root cause analysis to determine why that inaccurate result was created. Was it something in the testing data? Was it something in the design parameters of your specific deployment or the fine tuning process that may have happened? Was it a problem with the context inputs or the prompting of the AI tool that led to the inaccurate result? But you don't know if you're even generating inaccurate results unless you have decent eyes on the outputs, and that's where the problem, the challenge of monitoring at scale, especially when you've deployed something already, right? If it's already in production and you have tons of end users using it, it's very difficult to feel like you're properly monitoring everything. And so there are techniques in place and tools in place that do allow you to do that. And then testing is a great solution to kind of be periodically determining if something is going wrong.
Wonderful. Why don't we move maybe and talk a little bit about AI's dynamic risk environment? One of our upcoming questions, I think, is going to fit a little bit later in our discussion.
Yeah. Okay. So this is kind of setting the table on, what are we trying to address when we talk about governance? And the mandate here, and this is what I tell a lot of the organizations that we work with, is that when we're talking about AI governance, the most important thing in this moment is to be smart and to be flexible, because the regulatory environment right now and the risk landscape is in flux, and you have if you attempt to monitor all of the state AI bills that are coming out, international AI laws, certainly the activity in the courts, even right now, at what the things that the regulators are interested in. It's kind of multivariate in approach. It reflects differing policy viewpoints and philosophies. And at times, they conflict with each other. So we're in this fragmented environment. We're also in an environment where new ideas for how to regulate AI are being offered and kind of posited, seemingly on a weekly basis. The need for flexibility is that, if you think about where might we be in 6 months as far as regulations that might apply to your AI tools, where might we be in 12 months or 24 months? Nobody has a clear answer about that, and anybody that says they do is probably not properly accounting for all the different kind of stakeholders who are involved in policy creation right now. But we could easily continue down this path of highly fragmented regulatory frameworks. We could also be in a somewhat deregulated environment where preemption and other kind of deregulatory forces are able to play out. We see that right now in the Department of Justice's AI litigation task force, which was part of the administration's mandate to challenge some of what they see as the more onerous state AI laws. The deadline has passed on the Department of Commerce's list of onerous AI laws that they're supposed to create and then have the DOJ challenge. And so, we're watching that. It's possible that we're in a more deregulated space in 6 or 12 months. We just don't know. But for now, I think what is helpful for everybody in this conversation is to, let's think about like what are the different buckets of laws that exist out there right now. We're not going to be able to go through individual state laws or different country laws, but what regulatory philosophies are being reflected by the laws that have passed and that are now on the books. This slide shows kind of three regulatory frameworks that we have identified and that can be helpful for anybody who's trying to get their arms around what the regulatory landscape looks like. So the first one here is what we call risk-based laws. So these are laws that attempt to comprehensively regulate every deployment of an AI technology. They basically take a qualitative risk approach to regulating everything. So identifying risk levels in advance, and then using these kind of like qualitative assumptions about various potential risks to assign different AI deployments to each risk, to each type of risk, and then the compliance obligations and controls flow from whatever risk level was assigned to that AI deployment. So the kind of preeminent example of this is the EU AI Act that certainly does this. Um, you also see some kind of components of this philosophy in the what I call like the stack of AI laws that China has passed. You do see this kind of risk-based approach. And you have specific regulatory tools that we can talk about actually in a little bit that tend to be like more conducive to this approach. So what happens when you're bucketing everything by risk? Um, and what compliance tools might make sense. The second category is, might be understood as kind of a subtype of the risk-based laws. These are the decisional laws that have become very popular in certain US states. The idea here is we're just going to regulate significant or consequential decisions. So only those AIs that are used for decisions that have some kind of outsized impact on a consumer or other user. I say it can be a subtype of the risk-based laws because that in and of itself is a kind of characterization of risk level, right? We're deciding, we're making the policy judgment that these types of decisions pose a relatively higher risk than other types of decisions. What kind of decisions are those? Those in California are called significant decisions. In Colorado, they're called consequential decisions. We have a bunch of other state laws that kind of take the same approach. Generally speaking, these are decisions used by an AI, often that use personal data that result in the provision or denial of certain key services. So things like financial services, healthcare, employment decisions, educational opportunities, access to basic kind of government services or kind of basic services like food, water, et cetera. These are the kinds of decisions that at least policymakers have determined are worth more close regulation than other types of decisions. And we've identified some historical analogs here too that are kind of helpful from a conceptual standpoint. I think kind of geeks on law and legal policy have a lot of fun with this because we can kind of identify historical corollaries to these different types of approaches, and that can be helpful in trying to understand, where things might go here. The last one is what we call product safety laws because these take a kind of decidedly product safety oriented approach. The idea here is we're not going to bucket everything by risk. We're actually going to just identify specific potential harms and then regulate them. And so that might be as simple as identifying the worst case scenario for AI. AI shouldn't develop biological weapons and then just prohibiting it, right? So at most fundamental, it's just taking really terrible potential harms and then applying regulatory controls to them, whether it's an outright ban, whether it's some kind of more strict compliance standard that you might need to follow. And so this is where we've seen a lot of the activity across state capitals, right? Over the past year or two. Things like generative AIs that are used for, by minors, or that might be used to generate certain harmful content, like sexually explicit material, or like suicidal ideation and self harm. Use of chatbots to conduct, professionally licensed activity, like the provision of healthcare or the provision of financial services or insurance services. So that last bucket is kind of a somewhat of a catch-all, but much more kind of targeted. They do also tend to follow the headlines, I think we find. So you see some, kind of big investigative story about some terrible use of AI or a lawsuit or something, and then you see these kind of state laws tend to emerge that are designed to address that specific risk.
Well, thank you, Brandon. And so this chart, I think if you want to help explain, and I'll just add a little bit how you were talking about when we see something out there and then a company pushes the envelope too far, then we see a law. And
Mm-hmm.
we're finding a lot of the bills, there's 300 plus bills in AI something. You can start to group them kind of accordingly. There's a lot of companion chatbot focused bills. There's employment bills that are out there. There's kids bills that are out there.
Yeah.
And so, I'm sure you have some thoughts about this slide, but I just wanted to echo that's how we're starting to see this. And even what I would offer to people listening, even if you're not in one of those industries, you can still glean where is the focus, apply that to how you might be using AI, and think about what's the worst case scenario that might be here, because you might be next if some other company pushes the envelope too far in that area.
That's a really important point, and that is kind of a core function of risk assessments, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Kind of like only being limited by your own imagination sometimes. What are the potential harms of this deployment, right? Not just the ones that made headlines a couple months ago, maybe, but like how could this really go wrong, right? And even if there's not a specific law that is addressing that potential harm, we should probably control for it anyway, right? As an organization. Um, Another kind of key point there is that we've been living for decades with unfair and deceptive acts and practices laws. These are state laws and in the federal at the federal level, the FTC Act, that are designed to be super flexible and they're designed to really regulate and criminalize and make subject to civil penalties any use of business or anything really that results in deceptive conduct or unfair or abusive conduct. And that can, of course, be applied to AI. And we even see some laws right now. The Utah state legislature did this, and some other legislatures that have passed super simple laws that just say it's not an affirmative defense that you used AI to conduct an unfair, deceptive, or abusive act or practice. And so it's kind of somewhat of an obvious reality, but it's just trying to make clear that, look, these laws all are going to apply to use of AI at the same time. So this, we don't have to talk about this, but this just kind of reflects how active the map is right now. This is also not reflective of everything that is out there, but these are kind of the notable ones. And things are moving quite quickly. I think the moral of the story here is that a lot of governance techniques and kind of ongoing monitoring techniques should be designed around what we call thresholding. So trying to understand, when does your AI deployment trip the applicability of a certain state law? That's so important. It's also important at the design phase, understanding, okay, we're designing, we're developing or designing an AI deployment. What tweaks might we be able to make to have this deployment actually avoid some of the more onerous regulations? And so that's so important, and you can just see the importance of that here. A great example is the new California regulations on artificial decision-making technologies. These are oriented around technologies that replace human decision-making or substantially replace human decision-making. What human-in-the-loop controls might you be able to design into your AI system that would maybe take it out of that definition, right? And it's so important. We have the Colorado AI Act that does something similar. And this map is very important to keep in mind when you're thinking about that.
So we have a couple questions that I think this page is going to address, because we have a couple people asking about ADMT, the intersection of privacy and AI. And so, Brandon, I know you have some thoughts on these areas, as well as these kind of are our three big example laws in privacy to talk about.
Yeah, so this is a common question that comes up, and I think it's really helpful to think about, especially if you're a privacy professional or someone who's been kind of tasked with privacy compliance in your organization. Is what is our relevance to AI? Why are we getting all the AI questions, right? I always say there's kind of two reasons for that. One is, of course, that AI systems use a lot of personal data, in a lot of different ways, and so that's the clear, obvious reason. But the second is that a lot of the compliance and governance tools that have been innovated around privacy law, especially over the past 10 years or so of really significant innovation in privacy regulation, that a lot of those concepts and tools are fairly easily translatable to this task of also wanting to govern AI systems. So things like notice at collection, like pre-use notices, transparency, opt-out rights, appeal rights, impact assessments. These are all kind of like regulatory tools that are used in privacy law, and in many cases were innovated through privacy law, that we're now seeing applying to AI deployments. So when you're thinking about the intersection of privacy and AI, I always think those are the two biggest takeaways. Of course, we have privacy laws that directly regulate AI. And this is a misconception that I often still see from folks outside of the privacy world, thinking that, hey, we're really behind on AI regulation. What's really going on? Um, Laws as early as the Virginia Consumer Data Protection Act, which was passed many years ago, actually regulate directly AI through regulations on profiling and significant decision making. And then we've seen it directed even more directly regulated through Colorado's kind of innovations, both in the Colorado Privacy Act and also in the Colorado AI Act. And then, like I said, in the California ADMT regulations. So a lot of these laws are kind of thresholded by the use of personal data. So they are assuming, okay, to the extent you're using personal data in your AI deployment, these laws will apply. Not so much for the Colorado AI Act, not so much for some of the other AI laws that we'll talk about, but these kind of comprehensive consumer privacy laws are still going to be bounded by that initial threshold question of, are you using regulated personal data in your AI deployment?
And I'll just add a little bit onto the question of where should it fall. I think the other reason many privacy professionals end up wearing the AI hat as well is many of the processes like assessments and reviews and policies and being able to create that program has existed for privacy. And it is much easier to add to that from an AI perspective, while there is other considerations beyond just personal information. And so not only privacy, there's a great foundation already there. You might even have tools for these types of assessments. You already know how to get something done like this. And we're finding a lot of companies are moving with privacy people as the leader for AI governance for those reasons.
Yeah, and that's a really good question. I mean, we can talk about that in a little bit, but the question about accountability. Who are we going to make accountable for these projects? Is a difficult question. I have some thoughts on that later, which I can share.
Yeah.
Um,
So I think we had a couple other states we want to try and talk about a little bit.
yeah, so these are more examples. So a major focus has been on chatbots and companions. There were chatbot laws many years ago that weren't focused on AI, but California and New Jersey have laws that basically say, hey, if you're using an automated chatbot, you need to disclose it as such, or at least take measures designed to ensure that the user of that chatbot doesn't think they're talking to a live human. And then you've seen kind of more specific iterations of those concepts appear in New York, Utah, another one in California, for example. And these are focusing on usually certain use cases of an AI companion or an AI chatbot. But they're designed around, kind of two things. One, hey, let's continue to make sure that users understand that they're talking to an AI and not a human. And two, let's make sure that we're aware of the most potential harmful effects of these tools, things like suicidal ideation, things like use by minors. These are things that, at a policy level, we've determined need to have safeguards in place. And what does that often mean? It means implementing guardrails that identify when your AI system might be creating or generating or asked to generate that type of an outcome or harmful content, and then I not only identify it, but take certain escalation responses to address those uses.
All right. Now I think we were going to talk a little bit about health.
Another area where there's been really just a ton of activity, and um, you know, I think one reason for that is there's been a clear kind of mandate for innovation in the health space. I think at this point everybody has probably encountered an ambient AI in a clinical environment, in your doctor's office that helps simply with note taking, but increasing analytical capabilities and potential decisional capabilities. There's also this risk of an automated chatbot providing licensed, the type of recommendations or care that we reserve usually only for qualified and licensed professionals, right? So whether it's mental health, whether it's general health care. So we are seeing laws, and these are three of them. Uh, the most notable here, I think, is Illinois, which has an outright prohibition on the uses of AI for mental therapy purposes. Um, and then California has a really interesting one too, AB 489, that is trying to impose guardrails and safeguards on different uses of AI in the healthcare industry, and then nursing as one specific to nursing out of New Mexico.
All right. I think we're all fairly familiar with the privacy laws, so maybe we should,
Yep.
just in the interest of time, anything extra special you want to add here?
Nope. Just to say these are like kind of some of the more notably active enforcement authorities.
Yep. Probably not too surprising if anyone is doing some reading.
That's right. And then just last point, litigation. We've seen this like absolute wave of privacy litigation, largely oriented around wiretapping laws and some other similar laws. And those we're seeing that those theories are now being applied, as they have been to different emerging other technologies, now being applied to AI. So, you can even set aside all the laws that we've been talking about, and you must have this general awareness that, especially plaintiffs' attorneys are always searching for the next wave of emerging technology that they can kind of shoehorn their legal theories into and try to get a nuisance settlement or a class action or something like that.
Someone's always creative, trying to figure out what they can do next. All right, we're going to switch gears now to really building out a governance program. And to stretch everyone's fingers, I'm going to launch another poll: operationalizing AI governance. What feels like the hardest part of operationalizing AI governance for you and your company? Is it mapping data flows, conducting risk assessments, aligning all the stakeholders, or monitoring the evolving privacy laws and AI requirements? I appreciate you might pick all of them, but just pick the one that you think might be the hardest. What comes first? All right. I'm going to give it just a few more minutes. Stretch those fingers, find the mouse. All right. I'm going to end, share. And we are about half of you find trying to rally in the cats, or in our St. Patty's Day theme, the leprechauns. Challenging. That makes sense. And then we have kind of an even split after that of mapping data flows and conducting risk assessments, and maybe just around 12% in terms of monitoring the privacy laws and AI requirements, which is interesting because with over 300 bills out there, I think that's really hard. But at the same time, once you sort of pass that off, the actual tactical operational piece, I would agree, trying to get all the right stakeholders is really challenging, and to get them to agree and move forward is also a tricky
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
All right.
Absolutely.
So I think, Brandon, you were going to kick us off over here, and then we're going to move into some framework discussions.
Yeah, so actual governance, what to implement, where to start. One bridge between the conversation we just had and designing a responsible governance program and an effective governance program is kind of inventorying. Okay, well, what are the things we know we have to do, right? And you can map the three different frameworks that I talked about, to the popular regulatory controls, what we call here the regulatory toolbox. So this can kind of start to help you understand, what are we shooting for. If you're taking a kind of baseline approach of what regulatory controls do we know that we need to implement, like do we know that we're going to need risk assessments? In most cases, I think increasingly the answer is yes. But if you're trying to ask that question, the first way to answer it is like, well, is there a law in the books right now that applies directly to us and directly to our deployment of AI that requires us to conduct a risk assessment? And if so, what does that risk assessment look like? So this is one way to kind of think about it and to try to understand, all right, what types of things might we need to be able to facilitate, for which an AI governance program might be part of the solution.
And I just wanted to also offer. So someone in our chat here also emphasized that it's needing to think about not only that personal information, but also that business confidential information, and how you're kind of battling all of those different pieces together. So thank you for sharing, and I wanted to share that with the broader group because I thought that would be relevant. Okay, well, so one of the core frameworks that a lot of companies are using is the NIST RMF framework, the risk management framework. There are a multitude of frameworks out there. I'm finding this one makes a lot of sense. Many organizations are already using a NIST framework, maybe for security. Maybe they're using NIST. We do a lot of NIST privacy plus the various privacy laws. So this is the one that we're going to lead with today. If we really think about governing, what is that culture? Who's responsible? We just talked about having to herd together a lot of different groups. And what I will offer is I see a lot of steering committees and kind of group decisions, and that might work. You still need someone who's going to be able to make that decision and that accountability piece. So who's governing? For some, it's a single person that make all the decisions. For others, it's group decision. Even in group decision, is it majority rules or someone still has it? Who decides when you meet and what happens? So think about your culture of how you're going to be able to govern this entire AI governance piece. And like we just talked about, we have personal information, not personal information. How are you blending all of those risks and pieces together? It's about being able to map what is the context, what's actually happening, what are the risks tied to whatever it is that we're actually doing. We have to be able to measure and be able to identify risk one, risk two. We've assessed, we've analyzed, we've tracked, we've mitigated, we didn't mitigate. Who is then going to be the deciding factor also once you identify a risk? So if there's a risk identified, someone or teams have to think about, how am I going to mitigate? How risky is that? How are you going to measure that risk for your organization? Because that context also matters. What's risky for you might not be risky or as risky for another company that is on this call. And so you really need to be able to have a methodical approach to being able to identify those risks, assess them, analyze them, mitigate them, and track them. Because if you assign that to Sally, who follows up with Sally to make sure, or that team is actually doing what they're supposed to do. And of course, you need to kind of manage that whole process on an ongoing basis. It's all moving really quickly. What you do today might not be the same thing as next week or next month or so on. The business might be changing what it is that they're doing. And this framework is designed to help you put into place some of the policies and procedures in place to capture those changes so that you can continue to go through the cycle of mapping and measuring and managing. Brandon, what would you add to
Yeah.
what I've just shared?
Yeah, no, that's a great overview. I think the NIST RMF is really intended to be a flexible framework that covers any real AI deployment, right? And for that reason, people often glaze over when they start to look at it because they're just like, this is like so abstract. It's the same thing for a lot of the kind of other NIST protocols, but it's a really like it provides an organizing principle and a place to start, which is often the hardest step, right? If you're in an organization and you've got a million different wings of the organization trying to use AI in different ways, asking you to help with procurement, et cetera, it's kind of like an organizing principle is very helpful. And so what NIST RMF provides is a way to start to think about it. So those four functions that Jodi just went over, govern, map, measure, manage, are like intended to be, I think, roughly sequential, but they're all kind of living and they all do iterate off of each other. But if you just break down the task, of governance in these four ways, it can be really helpful. So like, let's start on govern. Let's start with top-down policy creation. Let's all agree like what our policies should be. Let's create some basic accountability. Jodi, on your point about kind of like this problem of fragmentation and decentralization of responsibility is like such a big problem. I've like seen this now for a year or two on AI specifically, where it's like you're trying to govern by creating committees, and kind of like bringing in all the different stakeholders, and then everybody has opinions and everyone has worries and considerations, but nobody actually has like decisional authority. And that's just like a recipe, I think, for like moving very slowly. And it is really helpful. And it's hard to do, but it's really helpful to centralize accountability and have like a clear line of escalation for this stuff. You're just going to get more done that way. And the NIST govern kind of tools within that function have some kind of good steers for that. Part of the challenge there is that you have like people who are empowered for general expertise. So your CTOs, CIOs, chief legal officers who are going to have something to say about basically every AI deployment in the organization, right? And then you have like use case specific expertise. So you've got HR, research and development, sales, like engineering. You've got all these different areas where a specific use case for AI might be deployed. And there's this tension about like, well, who should have real ownership over these different deployments, and that is a real challenge. And it calls for some like properly distributed accountability for sure. Um, the map function is a discovery function. Privacy pros, data inventorying, data mapping, it's basically similar. Let's be able to like map, identify, and account for all our different uses of AI in the organization. Measuring is basically risk assessment, right? Like we're going to analyze and assess AI regulated risks. We're going to check across things for reliability, fairness, bias, accuracy. Is it performing as designed? That all goes into the measure function. And it asks for qualitative and quantitative risk assessment. And then the last one is manage, which is just the ongoing day-to-day project of mitigating those risks that are defined in the measure function. So it is all very helpful. I'll also say, because I don't know that we have slides on it, but there are other governance frameworks out there, other than RMF. Like I think the next most popular is the ISO IEC 42001, I think it is, which kind of outlines an AI management system. And the difference there is there's a lot of similarities conceptually. I think the difference there from RMF is that it allows for a kind of formal, independent third-party audit function. It kind of sets forth what that looks like and certification, which is helpful.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. I would say if you are listening and you're just getting started, maybe you're one of those 6% or in that first 30%, you're kind of just getting started. This NIST RMF framework might be a really great place to start. You can always move up, and that ISO 42001 is a more advanced one, as you just shared, with a lot more intricacies in it. And this one might help you set some really great foundations to be able to move to that next complicated one. And what I wanted to do here is talk a little bit more about some of those operational practices that we just talked about. The ability to have some methodical ways to be able to understand what's actually happening, starting with a formal intake and review process. Business person A has this brand new, brilliant idea. Here's what they want to be able to do. Having business teams submit some type of use case through a standardized intake process. We're documenting what actually has to take place, meaning what kind of system, what kind of inputs. Is it personal information? What type of personal information? Is it not personal information? What are we using this tool for? Is it going to be making decisions? Is it just what is the output? So if we kind of break it down, I have a system, I have inputs, and I have outputs. I need to understand all of that. Which system? What are my inputs? What are my outputs? What is it actually doing? And of course, having a vendor review potentially on this system. Now, sometimes we have a system in place, that system's already been approved, but we're going to have new use cases. And so you might have the system in place, but how are you going to review the new use cases? Because one team might want to do something a little bit different than somebody else. This is where that cross-functional piece is really important. I've seen some where there's a formal assessment and team A gets their section to review, team B gets their section. I've seen others where it's literally a round table format and they're trying to review all of it together at one time. So this goes back to that culture piece, that governance, because it is critical to have it be successful to work in your organization. If you try and stick something that is so foreign in your organization, it's not going to succeed. You really have to think about how does work get done? How does it get approved? And create a system, a process, and a policy that's going to work. And when we talk about formal approval, literally who is approving here? Does legal overtake the business because of the risk? I've seen that in some places. I've seen others where it's the business gets to win over, a compliance area, and the business has to officially sign off that it knows here's what it's doing. Those are all culture tips, or not tips. Those are culture differences that each organization needs to be thinking about. And then you're going to want to identify how and where you're going to actually do all of this documentation. Now, part of this is going to need to be assessing the risk because I might be doing something that has very little personal information, or the risk is so much smaller compared to something that is going to make significant decisions on me. kind of a typical 9-box matrix here, right? Green and orange and red. Some of the software tools that are out there. So I think someone had a question about what kind of tools can help. There's a variety of different tools. Some are using privacy tools, some are using specific AI governance tools. Some privacy software companies have AI specific modules. Kind of take your pick. And then some people are just still in good old fashioned Excel and some type of digital document. Whichever works for you to actually get these done is the best system. But think about how you're going to evaluate that risk so that it can be consistent across everything that you're doing. You're scoring it, out comes a score, low, moderate, high. Some of the tools can try and score some of this automatically, right? Let's use some AI to help you with your AI. And so it might be able to help you there. And now your attention can be focused on those high risk areas. Other times it might just kind of have a flag. You answered this question. Now you can focus on those flags, but create some type of model that again works for your organization.
Yeah, this is really helpful, and I think that if you go back one more, I guess that's the upper left graphic there. Those are the risks that have been identified in the RMF as like things that you should be concerned about, right? I think they call them key risks. And then so that is helpful if you're trying to define the level of risk in that right, in a typical kind of risk framework or a risk bucketing kind of exercise. The real challenge with AI is the more generalized the tool is, right? Which they often are. You often have enterprise deployments of just generative AI tools that all of your employees might be able to use. You also have this possibility of like shadow AI and like you don't know what everybody's using or what they're using it for. The wider the propensity for potential use, the more difficult it's going to be to like kind of in a defined way assign risk to the tool. And so that's where like safeguards and guardrails are really helpful. And there was a question here about agentic AI, which we could talk about if we have time. I have a bunch of thoughts on it, but that kind of one of the promises of agentic AI is that an AI agent performs specific to pre-identified rules, right? And they're often quite specific and quite complex. If you have that confidence that an AI agent is always going to be, carrying out tasks pursuant to specific rules, it's much easier to assign these kinds of risk assessments to each AI agent, right? If you have that confidence. So that's the one good news about, I think one piece of good news about innovations on agentic AI, I would say.
All right. So, a couple kind of core deliverables, if you will, for an AI governance program. Let's start with the policy. We really need an AI governance policy. What are the rules around how you're even going to govern anything related to AI? And I have seen companies have all ranges. I've seen some where every single tool has to be approved in every single use case. I have others where here's a few tools that you can use them within these guardrails. Responsible use policy, personal information AI tools still count in under privacy. So we need our DSAR policy, vendor management. We just talked about the risk matrix. Brandon had mentioned earlier incident management, FAQ sections. And then, of course, we have our process. How are you going to actually do this? How are you going to ensure safety detection? What kind of human monitoring and intervention is here? Testing protocols, production surveillance, and then the templates. What are you going to use? Because in any program, and I kind of mentioned this earlier, why I feel a lot of privacy programs are adopting AI governance, because they have a lot of this in place and they can modify either adding AI related questions, which I've seen, or they're taking what they have and adjusting appropriately for AI governance. But think about those privacy impact assessments, privacy risk assessments. You convert them or add them or both for an AI governance piece. Think about that tool. I mentioned that before. And of course, on the vendor side, it's not enough just to have a contract and kind of toss that over to the legal team. The vendor assessment process needs to make sure it includes AI related questions and potentially even a testing protocol depending on who they are. So in the sense of time, you are all going to get this recording. And so in the recording, you will see these slides. We have our AR governance with risk assessments. I've talked a lot about these, so I think I want to move forward a little bit in talking about this idea, which is an inventory of AI systems. This is really important. I think sometimes people do this on their own. Other times they link it to the actual privacy inventory. Because if I'm doing a data privacy focused inventory, I'm going to uncover all different systems that might have AI in them. And in which case, I'm going to understand the data in them, how it's being used, and so on from there. But at the same time, we also might have AI systems that don't have personal information. And, or you might have a new AI system that didn't get caught yet in your data inventory process. So having both angles of making sure that there is some type of list and process to be able to flag and identify, oh wait, you're a new AI system. Who are you? What are you doing? So that I can then evaluate, figure out any kind of privacy impact, any kind of additional tool and testing, security impact, our contracts, and everything that we've just described. So, really having a good inventory of AI systems is definitely going to be critical. One of my favorites. I love a good data inventory.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, of course, we have to monitor these things because with everything we've just described, what you do today may not be the same as tomorrow. Many of us are, I mean, this world is moving really quickly. And you might say, yes, you can use this software tool today. And then tomorrow it added some new AI feature automatically turned on. And if you are a company listening who actually produces technology, one of the questions I encourage you to ask your teams, should you send tools with AI default on? I know we're having this discussion and you might be technically allowed to. What do your customers expect? So sort of think about how you have to do this for your own program, but then depending on the company you're in, think about what that is like now for your customers. And that might actually change or influence your product roadmap conversations. But you really have to think about how often are you going to come back in? Who are the people that need to be part of this process and how you're going to actually do that. This is that cross-functional piece. You can have bells and systems and automation that is here. Good old fashioned relationships and conversation is still really valuable and important to make sure that you actually are hearing about XYZ person using some new tool or some new use case. Because at the moment, I know we have agents out there, but people are still deciding how agents are going to go, and people are still deciding which AI system. So the people still count. I think the people still count. I want the people to count. And we've talked a lot about this with, integration in privacy compliance. So integrating with your PIAs or DPIAs, your data inventory from a privacy point of view, your contracts, your assessments, your security controls, all of that is how you can integrate. And the last point I want to be able to address is just training. Everything we've just described is lovely, but if no one has a clue what to do, no one's going to do what your policy says. You could have a wonderful digital policy, Brandon, and I would love to write you one. But if you don't train the people on them, we've just written a really great policy for you.
Mhm.
And we're still really happy, but we want it to be valuable. So it is critical to make sure that people know what to do with a policy, with an assessment, when to ask, who to ask, what's okay, what's not okay. What are your rules in your organization? And make sure you train them to their roles. Very important because each group might have something different that they need to know. And make sure that you're tailoring it for that group. And then you will have greater adoption and lower your risk exposure. And Brandon, I want to make sure you have some time to talk about AI testing
Oh my
um,
gosh, yeah.
and product lifecycle.
Okay, yeah, okay. So, gosh, we could do like five more, I think, hours on this or something. But
Maybe we'll have a
okay,
part two.
so yeah, so AI testing is something that like I've become like a real believer in. It at first to me sounded something that was too unwieldy and kind of the type of thing that's only done by the big AI, developers. Not so. So outcome based, especially outcome based AI testing, is possible with data scientists who know what they're doing, who are kind of aligned with the broader considerations brought by legal compliance teams and whatnot. So there are kind of three ways to do this, or three modalities. What you can do is retrospective testing. So this is usually pre-deployment of an AI tool before you publish, before it goes into production, using historical information or synthetic data to test whatever the AI system is before it's deployed in production. So it's like I said at the top, defining a standard. What are you testing for? Are you testing for anti-bias or discrimination? Are you testing for data leakage? Are you like what are you testing for? And then trying to recreate the production version of whatever your tool is, but in a retrospective way using historical or synthetic data. So that's the first. The second is prospective testing. This is where you're really testing your system against a human-only version of whatever you're trying to apply the system to. So it's kind of like an A/B test. You have an AI system and usually in a sandbox, and then you have a human system in parallel, and you're comparing the performance of the two and the relative risks of the two. And working with AI focused technologists and engineers, this is often one of the biggest messages that they have for us, which is we are all very attuned to the possible ways that AI can go wrong, but we often forget all the ways that human oriented, processes can go wrong too. And so it's important to, as we're assessing the risks that are posed by AI, we're also assessing them alongside risks of the alternative, right? And then ongoing monitoring. So after you've put a system into production, that continual monitoring and assessment of those risks. And AI testing is capable of doing that at scale. So you're using AI tools to do the testing, to test things at scale, assess the statistical output, and perform a root cause analysis if needed. I think there's one more slide on the
Yes.
different testing principles, which I kind of went through. Define your metrics, your baseline. This is what it looks like from the process perspective. I think there might be one more slide on the different.
Nope.
No.
Then we
Okay.
were going to do a
Well,
case study.
okay. So another one other way to do it is what we call adversarial testing. So this is common for generative AI deployments. Is that you can test a generative AI tool by essentially trying to break it. So creating all kinds of inputs and queries that are designed to elicit some kind of harmful response, and to understand when those happen, how often they happen, and what safeguards were in place. And then you test those inputs at scale using another AI tool. And then you're able to measure them at scale too. So really promising stuff here. And it can happen, at relatively limited scale at first, even for an organization that's deploying an AI tool. And it's really helpful and effective at that credentialing process. Say, hey, look, we performed this type of AI testing. Here was our methodology. Here were the results. And if anybody asks about it, or if an issue comes up, a regulator comes knocking, it's just another piece of information that you have, documentation that you can show to demonstrate that you've really been serious about your duty of care in deploying the AI system.
Excellent. And so as we wrap things up today, I'm not sure we're going to be able to do our case study. I think we might need to have a
No,
part two.
yeah,
Yeah, we're going to need. So instead, maybe we can kind of summarize here some of the different AI testing that is possible and that you might want to consider. I know we had a couple different questions related to that. So Brandon, I'll pass it back to you.
yeah. Okay, so that's the slide I was looking for. So these are the different concepts and types of testing you can do. It always starts with testing protocol creation, which a tester or a consultant can help you with. We do that ourselves in-house, so we can provide that. We also do testing at Manatt. So this is all different types of testing that we can do. I think I went over most of this. Bias testing is like the most common example here. So if you have like a decisional tool, say you're in the insurance industry, financial services, healthcare, and it's making some kind of decision, or even if it's assisting with some kind of a decision, you need to know if biased outputs are occurring. Is there a bias in the training data? Is there a bias in the way that the AI algorithm is written? Need to know that. It's so crucial, and it's where regulators are first going these days. So very important.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for sharing. I think we have addressed most of the questions. There was one question, though, on controls on agentic AI. So maybe what I'll
Yeah,
do is if you can address that, I'll just kind of remind everyone we both, Brandon and I, have a plethora of different resources available to you. I encourage you to follow us. We both post a lot of content on LinkedIn. We're so grateful that you were here today. And so, Brandon, if you want to address that controls and agentic AI, and then
sure.
to everyone else, thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, and this will probably take us over, so feel free to drop off as I'm talking. But also feel free to follow up with these questions. We've been doing a lot of thinking on agentic AI controls. I think first message is consider thinking of AIs like humans. So the same human-based controls that we're used to applying to humans, access privileges, prohibited uses, express authorization, these all apply to agents too, with the added benefit that AI agents tend to perform exactly as they're told, right? Humans don't. So there's a lot to like take away from that, and it's really helpful to think of that things that way. The tools for generative AI governance may be insufficient for agentic AI. So things like checking for keywords and phrases and prompts and outputs is one way to govern a generative AI tool, but it's very difficult to do for agentic AI because the idea behind agentic AI is you have a string of decisions and relative autonomy that you're asking the AI tool to undertake. And so if you're just used to testing one output in a generative AI setting, that's probably not going to work for controlling and monitoring agentic AI systems. But tools are emerging for this, and there was another question about this. So you have centralized agent managers that provide like real-time interfaces. You take that kind of inventory of agents that you would ideally create in a governance program, but you have a control panel. So they're all identified. You can see what they're doing, what kind of actions they're taking in real time. You also have tools that are like intermediary SDKs that go between the agent call and the agent decision, and that can be designed to prevent the kind of worst decisions that might be made by an autonomous agent. And then the last thing I would point to is like logging and audit trail capabilities. So this is often using like block technologies where you have different agents mapped to current security controls. They're identified using like cryptographic, like hashing. You can follow everything that's happening, and you have an actionable log that you can use if if a regulator comes knocking, or if you're doing an audit, you have an audit trail or a log of everything that the agents inside of your enterprise system have done. It's very important. We know this from a computer science and cybersecurity perspective. It needs to happen for agentic AI too. So I have a bunch more thoughts on this, but those are some, I think, three big takeaways for now.
Amazing. Well, Brandon, thank you. Thank you all for staying a little bit after for that. If you have any follow-up questions, please reach out, like I said, to Brandon or myself. In terms of Red Clover Advisors offerings, here's just a couple smattering examples of what we have. Here is our contact information. Again, we are both really active on LinkedIn. If you're at IPP, come say hi and find us as well. And again, Brandon, thank you so much to you for joining us and sharing all of your wealth of knowledge on everything AI regulation and AI governance. Thank you so much, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jodi.